Are Western allies concerned about Ukraine's counteroffensive? New CNN reporting reveals that allies are getting sobering updates from the battleground, specifically about Ukrainian forces' ability to retake significant territory. One senior US official says the counteroffensive is going harder and slower than anyone would like. Ukraine also has a limited window to push forward, officials say. Weather and fighting conditions are expected to worsen when fall approaches. And this is, of course, a marked change from the optimistic rhetoric that we heard at the start of the offensive. CNN chief US security correspondent Jim Sciutto joins us now from Washington, D.C. with his reporting. Jim, this is a very important development and insight into the thinking of the Western officials and allies. What is the actual surprise or disappointment here specifically? Because we knew that this counteroffensive would be grueling. It's essentially an attrition war. Yeah. What elements were raised to you?
It's a number of things, really, Bianca, and I'm hearing quite similar assessments both here in the U.S. and in Europe, and that goes for military officials, diplomats, as well as lawmakers. Some of it was expected. Russian defensive lines are difficult to breach. They are multi-layered. They are covered with tens of thousands of mines, and they have incurred, as they've tried to breach those lines, just devastating losses. Ukrainian forces have. And as a result of that, they have pulled some of those units back because they want to reduce those losses, understandably. But there are also longer-term issues here. Some criticism of the short amount of training that was possible for some of these Ukrainian units, particularly as they receive new advanced Western weapon systems like the German Leopard tank. In some cases, I'm told, just about 8 weeks of training. And big picture, the challenge of turning units into really mechanized brigades in a short time span is a difficult thing to do, and to do with success. And we're seeing the results of that with this really back and forth along the front lines, gaining some territory in some areas, but certainly not to the degree that had been hoped. And I'd been told by administration officials as well that disappointment goes for Western officials, but also for the Ukrainians themselves. They haven't given up hope, but as you mentioned, Bianca, time pressure is real. Fall is coming. Weather, fighting conditions are going to worsen, and there's also political pressure, both here and in Europe, for success and success quickly.
And Ukraine's security service says a woman is now in custody in connection to an alleged plot to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukrainian security officials published a blurred image that they say shows the informant for Russia. She has not been named, but officials say she's from the southern Ukrainian region of Mykolaiv. And CNN's Claire Sebastian joins us now from London. Claire, what more are you learning about this alleged plot to assassinate President Zelensky?
Yeah, Rosemary, we don't know much more than what the security services have already laid out. They haven't named this woman. They haven't given us her citizenship. They do say that she was a resident of the Mykolaiv region and that she was a saleswoman in a military store. Beyond that, we don't know much. They're saying that she could face 12 years in prison. But I think this really draws attention to two things. One, that President Zelensky is under threat. This is something we've known since the beginning of the conflict. And in fact, President Putin himself has said, we're not fighting against the Ukrainian people, although I think the victims of various recent attacks might dispute that, but that they are fighting against what he calls the regime in Kyiv. So we know that there have been attempts in the past on President Zelensky, and this is clearly something that's ongoing that the security services have to combat. Secondly, I think is the issue with informants, that they are in a constant battle against this, trying to prevent information not only, for example, about, in this case, the itinerary of the president leaking out, but they also said that this same woman was trying to gain information as they tracked her beyond that trip by President Zelensky to the Mykolaiv region. They continue to track her, and they say that she was trying to track down information about electronic warfare systems, ammunition storages, all things that are critical to the Ukrainian efforts on the front line. So look, I think it's potentially convenient for the security services that, given the publicity around this being an assassination attempt on Zelensky, they were able to sort of get a lot of information out about this and create a deterrent at this critical time in the conflict.
Joining me now from the southern port city of Odessa. Yevgenia Geba, welcome to the program. You used to advise former Prime Minister under the Zelensky administration. And I just wonder whether you also have a bit of a disconnect between the bombardments in Ukraine over the weekend at the same time as this peace conference was going on.
Hi, Kristen, and thank you for inviting me. Well, that's every time what we witness here in Ukraine when there is a peace summit or any high-level negotiation going on with Ukraine, talking about the need for just and endurable peace. We experience these attacks, indiscriminate Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. I'm based in Odessa, so I can tell you that just 2 nights ago, we had a major attack with Russia using every kind of ammunition, starting from different types of missiles to drones to attack civilian infrastructure, to attack agricultural, seaport infrastructure. The other day, we had Russia attacking Odessa city center with the UNESCO protected World Heritage. So obviously, there is this link and there is this brutal aggression of Russia going on in Ukraine, not only on the battlefield, but also against civilian targets.
So that's happening, and I don't know whether you've read, the readouts from the peace conference, but from your perspective, even though nothing absolute concrete was achieved, no, plans listed, however, certain Ukrainian officials say it was a success and that future episodes, if you like, are being planned. From your perspective, what about that gathering was favorable towards Ukraine?
Well, obviously, it's not an easy task to put an end to Russian aggression. So for Ukraine, the most important part was first engaging the global South, not limiting its diplomatic efforts with the, let's say, global West. This time we had Brazil, India, and even China present, which is important because you need to have this ownership feeling in the multipolar world, so not necessarily focusing on one part of that to make it legitimate and really international. On the other hand, we do have this general consensus that any peace negotiations must be based on 2 principles. One is respect to the United Nations Charter, and the other one is territorial integrity of Ukraine. That's important. Last but not least, most probably we'll see more efforts coming for humanitarian vectors or humanitarian dimensions like food security, like energy security, like prisoner swap and return of Ukrainian kidnapped children. And that's where, of course, the presence of Saudi Arabia, China, and other global actors are really important.
And Russia may be keeping an additional eye on the war in Ukraine from space. The Defense Ministry launched a new satellite from a cosmodrome in the country's northwest on Monday. Russian state media report it was placed into orbit and is functioning normally. Its radio-based navigation system is the Russian equivalent of the EU's Galileo system and America's GPS. Well, Russia also is preparing to launch its first lunar landing craft in nearly 50 years this Friday. The Lunar 25 lander will spend a year on the moon searching for ice near its south pole. According to the Russian Space Agency, the discovery of sufficient quantities of ice could support humans on the moon in the future. India launched a similar probe last month and it's now orbiting the moon.